Hello, I'm Filiberto Amati, and I'm here today with Marco Bevolo, my research partner for the next episode of our research on the future of events. Marco, welcome, and please introduce our esteemed guest of today.
Thank you so much. Today we have a well, we have a design talent. So he's a design thinker. He's not an emerging talent any longer because he already proved himself with his collaborations, projects, with his experience in India in a highly reputed design firm. French born, American raised, European at heart, Ugo Pilate. And he is going to help us from the perspective of design thinking, from the perspective of digital design and digital lifestyles, and from the perspective of cities to understand the future of business events and events in general from now to 2 to 5 to 7 years in the future. Ugo, would you like to please introduce yourself better than I did?
Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Filiberto. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. So as you said, I grew up in the U.S. and I was trained as an industrial designer, but really quickly went into the co-creation and service design space, which meant using my industrial design making skills and prototyping skills to encourage collaborative making and collaborative thinking. So can take many forms, but so long as you have more than one person working together with their hands and their mind, then I'm there and I enjoy these kinds of settings. And I usually design them because it takes a lot of, I think, fine-tuning the constraints and the pacing and the timing and what you give as assignments and where do you give flexibility and freedom. And so this is a lot of what I've been playing with.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thinking about and again, please bringing your perspectives also from your understanding of cities, of urban digital futures, and what have you. So definitely feel free to deviate in a creative fashion. Would you see business events and events in general? Would you see the community platforms where people gather for events to be digital, physical, or hybrid in the next 2 to 5 years?
I think I'll have to take the middle ground and say hybrid for now. It's really hard to see what will stick beyond the limitations of travel, but I think either from cost cutting to accessibility of the events, the idea that these conferences can now have attendance from all around the world in this space is really valuable and is likely not to go anywhere and is likely to be made available in some capacity with streaming being much more a common part, whether it's through Twitch, YouTube, or any of the new players, Facebook, before as well. But so my guess is that it's going to be hybrid, at least in the coverage, right? Then the actual platform and the setup and the kind of how to say spatial infrastructure of the event, I really wonder, because I think we're still really in this kind of Zoom setting where you have several cameras, and then what, So one event that was a nice hybrid was the MozFest from Mozilla, and where they had a mix of they hosted it in spatial chat. That's a kind of digital space where you still have your camera feed, but you move around, and so it allows for a little more serendipitous encounters, walking up to people, and it's a really small tweak, but it adds a lot to the kind of human angle, and they complemented that with 3D spaces like Mozilla Hubs, where you were able to have more curated spatial experiences. So that kind of element, I don't know how much it will stay in that hybridization. And so what I mean is about the digital presence, I think we'll definitely have a lot more coverage in streaming, but this kind of commitment to digital spaces that have a kind of where you move around and you do experience the space beyond being present. I don't know how much will be invested in that, but I think that's going to be a really big question, and that's the space I'll be interested in working in.
So only to be clear, you think that the environment will be digital, but the mechanisms of interaction are resembling the physical mechanisms. If I understand your.
Yeah, I can maybe reframe or rephrase or summarize, but what I'm suggesting is that it will be hybrid. You will have physical and digital components, but how much is invested in making that digital immersive, or how much effort is put into what that digital means? I'm not sure. I think streaming will completely, some sort of online coverage will, I think, become default. But this sort of digital space where you feel like you're walking around, where you feel like you're doing things with other people, I'm still unsure about how much will be invested in making that available. Is what I mean.
Yeah. Heriberto?
It's actually, I think I'm completely in line with your point, and I agree. We need to bring serendipity back into this, but of course, it's difficult to completely replicate a physical experience in a 3D world. What do you see as a designer and as a practitioner and someone who's been developing the notion of a co-creation, but also being a participant? What benefits do you see into the pure physical and into the pure digital? So where one ends and the other begins in terms of trade-offs?
I love this question. Thank you very, very much. So there are a couple of things. I mean, one, definitely from the point of co-creation. I've written a bit about this also, but there's just, how to say, I think in general, the interfaces to enter digital spaces are still very limiting. It's mostly screens. We've seen that the Minority Report haptic type things has still a long time to go. VR is really demanding. So physically, from a kind of a human vehicle perspective, it's still a bit limiting. When you see what you can achieve just from a screen, and what I mean by this is when you play Fortnite or Minecraft just on a smartphone, it's incredible just how much you can project. The kind of this ability to be there spatially. You start building out the world. You're not limited by the screen like someone looking over your shoulder might be. Just by the way of walking around, flying around, it almost sounds simple, but it's a really completely kind of transformational experience. And so in that way, I think what I've loved about prototyping in virtual spaces is the malleability of the world and some of the freedoms it affords. So especially with getting around spaces. So of course, you have flying, but you also, in certain cases, you also have climbing. You have, and there's something really thrilling when you're able to find that state of flow between with the built environment where you can just scale a building, then appear at a party, then do this, then fly away to do something else. This kind of mobility and freedom, I think, is severely untapped in more mainstream spaces and has been around for more than a decade in Minecraft. You're seeing it a lot as a competitive ability now in video games like Fortnite, where people are having to fly, jump, run, build all at the same time. I mean, I have to watch Fortnite footage in slow motion to understand what's happening, but it is a very, I think, an extension of that visceral feeling where it's just through the eyes, but in the way you experience the space behind the screen, it's very immersive. And so in the space of co-creation, what's nice about this is that this immersion translates in two things. One, it's much more literal. So when you're doing co-creation, usually if you're in the physical space, you're using tape, you're using glue, you're using cardboard, you're cutting stuff up. It takes time, it's messy, you have to understand what the other is thinking. Here, you can much more quickly say, hey, let me put this here. The other person says, hey, I disagree, can we twist it? And so the malleability plus the fidelity are really, really valuable in the co-creation space. So again, there's still these constraints of accessibility. You have like the video game Fortnite, for example, is a very heavy game. It's really unfortunate, and it's really not the question I want to have to ask myself, but I cannot use it in most of my workshops because it's too intense and it's meant for very specific computers. So I think, when we come back to, and this is a little bit what we saw in the Baltan discussion as well, but you have all this digital freedom, and you come back to the kind of physical constraints of it, it really becomes a little bit dull of a question. It's again, we have to speak about CPU speed and the quality of your computer, and that's a bit unfortunate. And I think that's the balancing act we have to see.
No, and thank you very much, because I actually, while you speaking, I also realized that there is a gamification part which I personally miss, in the sense that I know Minecraft and the other games and how they work, but I just realized how my kids who play them are actually, despite the bidimensional screen, they have an ability, because they've learned that, to experience that space very immersively, despite it is bidimensional. Whereas I don't, because I haven't played. I watched them playing. And I think actually this is very important, because that's the key. There is a gamification part, so being part of being able to learn how to experience that kind of reality in that sense. And this for me, I never thought about it.
And a proof of that, if I may, I'll try to be short, but it's that.
Don't be short.
Okay, perfect, thank you. But on this, what's been really surprising is that Fortnite, especially, has been one of the most painful softwares to use in a workshop for me. It's I have to ask people to download it a day in advance because it's a 5-hour download. I have to have them sign up. I have so many hoops to jump through. And still, people, because I do it with non-gamers, I had never played Fortnite before I tried experimenting with it to run my workshops. And they just place one item, because Fortnite is a little bit like Sims meets Minecraft. It's very realistic. It's a little cartoony, but it's much more easy to kind of recognize elements than in Minecraft, where you're building with blocks, and it's a little more like Legos, where someone has to tell you, hey, I made a boat, And in Fortnite, it's you place a boat. And so in that way, people just place 2 items and they're really excited, because you have these really simple features like, hey, here's a bathtub. You can also turn it on its side. You can make it so big that it becomes a fridge. It becomes a pool. It becomes, and so just that really transforms your ability to think about objects and their possibilities. And it's been really impressive to see that something that takes half an hour to get people on, everyone's dragging their feet, they're upset, understandably so. You get it started and everyone's happy. And I've rarely seen this kind of thing. And so I think it's still the novelty effect, and I can't wait to get over this first half hour, but it's really a testament to just how incredible it is, whether or not you come from a gaming space.
But
Thank you.
What will be left? Because if I navigate your answers in the matrix, it's hybrid, but it's mostly digital. And what would be left for? And here I introduce the second question. We chop our universe into sales and transactions, networking for business, learning, mentoring, coaching, and what have you. That's very much also internal in ensuring that companies survive as a social organism, and then leadership and reputation, that can be attending an event as a keynote speaker, a business event, or it can be attending a fair as a brand, and then because you are there, you're cool. So I'm making things really mundane. But where do you see the most interesting developments in this, if you have to choose among these 4 domains? And where would you see a residual relevance, if you see any, of the physical element of events?
No, that's a great point. And the reason I focused on the digital was because that's where a lot of my experiments have led me, especially since the lockdown. But so one great reference that you should look at is the iMyth Festival. So iMyth Festival, it's a new media festival in Mumbai, India, that I did a lot of workshops for and I participated in organizing when I was at Quicksand, which was a lot on immersive media and these kinds of mediums. A lot of the artworks were digital and the spaces and all of that. And especially at this kind of event, you just see the value of the physical, which is to say to be off the screen, to share your experiences, but also to relax. And so my concern with this is the big question to me is how is the digital used? Is it to make the content and event available to people who cannot be there in present, or is it as a kind of immersive tool for collaboration for people who are present in the same room or in the same space? And so that's really a key question in understanding that hybridization, and it's completely relevant to expect to design around both, or at least hybridization is relevant in both cases. And I think being able to relax, to speak, to be off the screen is an integral part of enjoying your experience in the virtual space. You know, that time off, that silence is completely relevant. And actually, I'm really excited because on June 19th, I'm running my first kind of Fortnite collaborative design workshop in a esports gaming center in Paris. And so we are going to be able to kick off the event where we're just on paper discussing, brainstorming, mapping. And so we're going to, usually this is done also digitally for me, but this time we're really going to make a point to be on paper, playing with each other, improvising first, and then going into the virtual space, and then coming back out to present. And so it's a matter of also organizing that choreography. And so in that case, I think a lot of the staples, I mean, from a sales perspective, I don't think alcohol is going anywhere to begin with, but I think also, the kind of the typical staples that make the branding of an event and all of that, I don't see that going anywhere at all. And maybe changing with new products, with new ways of applying your brand and having people engage with it. But I think it's a big part of relaxing and getting away also from the pixels.
But from the point of view of people getting together for business, whether in the company or outside the company, do you think they will meet more? For example, do you think there will be sales meetings going on in the city that you envision in your mapping, your exercises, in your workshops? Do you think people will meet to know each other, establish trust, and then the transactions will be online? Do you think companies will only be made of freelancers, and then there is no cohesion and everybody goes to a spa or to a church or to a mosque to individually manage themselves? I mean, in this scenario, in thinking about the city of the future, where do you see the actual events happening in terms of driver? What will motivate people to get together?
But I don't know that these are going to change necessarily, right? There's the drivers of the legitimacy, the brand, the being seen next to, and that's, and maybe if that's your driver, then of course you're still willing to go to a gymnasium or a really dull warehouse, but that has those individuals. I think you see that a lot with even in Zoom, where people have been meaning to meet each other. They see the other person's name and then they start a private chat and let's meet up and grab a coffee. I think it's tough to compartmentalize them, because I think it's going to be a lot of this. It's going to be, hey, the big proponent, the big added value, I think, of the digital is this sort of accessibility. It's, you're not seated over there on the other side of the room and I have to go find you. I can just chat at you. And so I think there's this contact initiation might change a little bit. things to digital, and so that might be a motivation for doing that. But then how much that influences the ability, I would not be able to.
But maybe the first contact might be more physical than digital. Could that be an area where the physical is a residual? Because if you think
I completely think so. Yeah.
you and I spent
Exactly.
3 days in a workshop online. You are now online, but in between we had a coffee and we spent 3 hours. I introduced you to the bookseller who speaks French. So do you think that the trigger for relationships will be more physical, and then the digital space will take over for everything else, transactions, networking, and so on?
Yes and no. I think the because of the limitation of the screen, I think the physical is still going to be very present and as much as possible. And so if you again taking,
I'm sorry for interrupting. It's going to be present, but I would be interested to know what function do you see for this residual physical presence, if you see a function. And I can make a very simple example with Tinder, erotics, and love go.
Yeah.
With Tinder, erotics and love go online, but at a certain moment you need to meet, at least in my generation, maybe the millennials, not so much. You need to meet to consume the thing. And so in Tinder, the contact is digital, and then the physical is necessary to substantiate the actual. In certain cases, it's the transaction, but that's a different field. So, do you think that in business the role of physical might be more to establish the trust, or where there will be a serendipity where it cannot be cataloged? I'm interested only if you see a specific.
No, but that's what I was trying to say, that, if we take, again, I think us meeting is a great example where I don't know that I would have been able to reach out to you the same way had it not been first online, where we're attending an event, I'm able to share some links, we're able to speak like this. Then I would much rather meet in person. And I would have been more than happy to do this in person. But for the convenience of, so first off, coming back to, we met in person because of this sort of human rapport, body language, all the forms of communication that we don't have access to necessarily through the digital. But then for the convenience of documenting this encounter, now we're back in digital. If we had to work together, depending on the topic, I would say it might be a little more digital, it might be a little more in person. But I think that right now, because of the nature of screens, whether it's in video games or in Zoom, I think I would really value physical over digitals when there isn't, when recording and tracing isn't. So what I mean by recording, it's post-its, it's filming, it's writing. That, I think there's a lot of value in doing collaboratively in digital. Period. You don't have to take photos. You don't. It's very basic things, but it's there. But for everything else that's part of the human experience, I much rather value physical. And in my work as an industrial designer, that was a big turning point. I went in wanting to sketch with pencil and markers. When I realized it was going to be all 3D modeling and rendering, I had a bit of a, and that's why I went also towards co-creation, so I could make things and meet people in person. So
if I can, try to interpret what you just said, at the end of the day, the lines between digital and physical are very blurred. But the motivation, it's always, the experience. And the technology limitations, it's where, the screen is limited, and therefore the physical experience, the physical world is what delivers on that experience. But wherever the screen is good enough, the screen is also helpful in that context. That seems to me more or less the framework.
Correct. With the added benefit of this sort of recording or documenting that is so important these days also. And so screenshots, collaborative software, all of those that are really not to be underestimated either. But yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is great. It's a great way of putting it, to be honest with you.
But you know, I don't know if you're speaking to anyone from that space. I'd really recommend it. And there's one person I can put you in touch with who is in Eindhoven, but in the role-playing space. It's really interesting. So this person I met, Eye of Lore, I have to check that that's the correct name, but they are a kind of serial entrepreneur on Kickstarter to make actual board games. They run events, but they also run a Discord. So they have their own kind of server with their own community they're growing there. Plus, they're creating a digital narrative generator and digital tools for the role playing. And so they're completely going, you know, both feet in both roads. They're not choosing a fork in the path. They're just keeping the two. So I think, you know, there's some really interesting stuff there as well.
Absolutely. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And where do you see yourself in 2 to 5, 7 years in this world of hybrid meetings, hybrid events, and hybrid erotics? But not on the erotics part. But where do you see yourself growing and going?
What I'm most interested in is so this idea of linking my practice to the making of the city is fairly recent. It's as of September when I moved to the Netherlands. So I'm still trying to find my footing, to find my relevance, and where my tools can be most useful. And what I'm interested in is this idea of how do you use these tools to bridge, especially fiction and nonfiction. So you know, there's a lot of attention to speculative design, to design fiction, but it's almost like a question of appetite and binaries. You know, is your client up to it or not? And what I'm interested in is a lot of what comes from a literary space where you have magical realism, you have psychogeographics with Debo, you have all these things where it fuses. And so this kind of tension between fiction, nonfiction, and how they inform each other is something I'm into, and I'm trying to do that also with physical and digital in the space of the city. And so the big question, I can do it completely as a artist, a creative, and have all these experiments, but as an industrial designer by training, I'm also trying to find out things that work. You know, there's a lot of speculation in that space. And so in 5, 7 years, what I'm trying to find out also are what are strategies, what are methods that I can recommend that add value, and what is this value? Because right now it's, again, we have people, gamers, usually, you know, younger kind of Gen Z who've been in this gaming space and who've been using it as an entertainment method. I think it has a value from a design and collaborative experience method, but the language, the KPI, the kind of return on investment language isn't there yet. And so my hope is that in 5, 7 years, I have a more kind of matured and structured language to address this and make a case for it. And hopefully I have my own case studies also that I've lived and that I can kind of use to prove that. So it's really this sort of transition point you're seeing me at. So I don't have those yet, but that's where I'm hoping to head.
Okay, thank you very much. Filiberto, do you have...
No further questions, Hugo. It's really, this is brilliant. I mean, it's thank you very much for the insights and for, you know, putting so much light on parts that we hadn't thought about. And it's really great to see our reality. It's the same reality, but, you know, from a different point of view, from a different perspective. You know, we did a previous study, Marco and myself, on how we saw the blurred lines of leisure and work already in 2007. And I think that, you know, the reality you are describing, it's way beyond in terms of where the digital, phygital, and physical lines are really now just, you know, I don't know, almost dimensions of each other. You know what I mean? And it's the fact, but our limitation is that we can see 3. So we fix one axis and then we see the other 2 and we miss one, probably. So it's really a point of view perspective. And this is just terrific. Thank you.
Well, actually, Ugo, I have a complaint, because normally I realize I take my notes on the matrix, but you are the
Sorry.
first respondent to crash the flat dimension of the matrix. So, well, thank you so much. It's been inspiring, exciting, and especially I hope it's going to be the second trigger or the third trigger of a great dialogue and exchange in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Ugo.
much.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.